For many, these are simply pictures from history, from a war long ago. But how do you tell the story of the killing of 6 million Jews and make it real?
We tell the story of the Holocaust through the eyes of a little girl whose life was disrupted and family killed. That girl is my mother and our grandmother, and her name is Paula Shemiavich.
Meet Yoshi Shamavi and his daughter Ella. They are telling the story of Paula, who is his mom and her grandmother. She survived 2 of the infamous Nazi death camps. Ella first heard the extent of her grandmother's survival and rescue through the Steven Spielberg project of Holocaust stories. It was the first time Ella and her dad really heard and understood what Paula lived through and what she still remembers.
And what is etched in my mind is the barbed wire, the electric wire.
Hearing about my great-grandparents dying in the ghetto and hearing about almost all of her siblings getting killed, hearing about her sister and her body getting thrown off a moving train by a Nazi. None of that is easy to hear. We believe this is her sister, Fela.
But it's a story this millennial and her dad are now committed to sharing. They speak to school groups and others about Paula's life. It's all part of a broader public program sponsored by the Stan Greenspon Center for Peace and Social Justice at Queen's University. It's more than just a personal history lesson through one family. It's about the bigger lessons of what can happen and what did happen.
People who weren't actively involved in the killings or actively involved in the persecution, but they just stood by and watched. And society has decided, I think, determined that being a bystander is very detrimental and dangerous, that we can't stand by and watch as things happen.
They were in Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp in Poland. This was the largest and most infamous death camp built to carry out what the Germans called the final solution.
But we had to struggle alone. And then it became a war of survival, to stay alive, not to die of starvation, not to get killed, and not to be taken to the ovens.
Of the nearly 1.3 million people who were sent to Auschwitz, 1.1 million were killed primarily in gas chambers. Yet Paula's story has twists and turns, including how a child so young could survive.
If she was younger than 7 years old and when the war started, I don't think she would have had a chance to survive because they wouldn't have needed her to work.
Her job? To sew clothing for German soldiers and to clear away the rubble in towns that had been bombed by the Allies. According to the Holocaust Museum, roughly 6 to 11% of European Jewish children survived. Paula was part of that small number of children who made it out of the death camps. In April of 1945, Paula and the other children were liberated by the British and placed in displaced persons camps, ultimately moving as a group to Israel, where she met her husband, Yoshi's father. But why continue to tell the story? According to the Greenspon Center, which shares the story of Holocaust survivors in this area through its Heritage Testimonial Project, the need has never been more urgent.
It's even more important to have individuals understand that what we call bullying and what we just see as verbal abuse on the playground and individuals hurting one another, we hear about this all the time in the news. It's more important to be an upstander and to stand up.
In the year 2020, you see the statistics that anti-Semitism is on the rise in the United States. It's hard to imagine. And that is the motivation that gives us, propels us to go and share the story as much as possible.
And as this millennial points out, her grandmother, who lives in Israel, is 87 years old. And there will be a time when she can no longer tell her story. So Ella and her dad, second and third generations of a survivor, see that bigger picture.
Why it's important to tell her story is so that people understand what can happen when fear and indifference and hatred take hold. And when people start to collaborate with hate, unimaginable things can happen.
For this father-daughter team, it is a labor of love. It is a story of survival. It is a lesson that gives life to the words, never forget. For Carolina Impact, I'm B. Thompson reporting.
A story that I will learn much later in my life.